Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Achtung! Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. And, well, we've got a special guest. We'll get to that in a minute. We are talking today in a 3-part series. The first part about the SAS, the Special Air Service, in France and their role in the Overlord campaigns and beyond. Jim, who are we talking to today?
We've got a great friend of the show, Tom Petch, who is, he's the man when it comes to all things SAS, having dabbled in that little area himself back in the day, but obviously not in the war, but more recent times. And
dabbled would be the word, James. Dabbling is what I did. I always feel a bit guilty as I know people who've commanded the regiment or done 22 years, and that's not me. But yes. I dabbled.
You dabble, but anyway, you know what you're talking about. But you're also a very learned fellow, and you've written that brilliant book. Anyway, you're the best person to come and talk about this, so that's great. And actually, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a little 2-parter because, this has been the great year of 80th anniversaries, and we did a lot on Normandy and D-Day, but we deliberately barely mentioned the SAS when we were doing our big D-Day Normandy series. I think we just reffed, didn't we, Operation Titanic on D-Day itself for diverting Eric Marx's reserves in the wrong direction. But that was literally it. But it's such a good subject and it's so interesting, and all the different operations in Brittany and to the east of Paris and further to the south near Limoges. All that stuff is really, really good. So we thought we'd do that. But I think first and foremost, what we really want to do is put it all in perspective and give a bit of context to the whole thing. And so we're going to talk a little bit, aren't we, about the origins, just to go back. We have talked about the SAS before, but it's nearly always been North Africa stuff, hasn't it? And Sterling. And
well, I think that's the stuff people know. And Rogue Heroes has sort of rammed that home, hasn't it?
Well, anyone who's read a Damien Lewis novel will know that will have read about them in France and things. But yes, I think take the point.
Okay, so, Tom, how, in the roundabout way, does this all begin? How do we end up with Grady disguised like a Frenchman fighting with the Macquis in 1944?
And why are we the only country with special forces? Or really special forces?
Those are good questions. We'll do the French dressing up a bit later, but I think the only country to have a special force in 1944, unless we forget, we didn't even have a parachute unit in 1939. So this is a quantum leap in sort of military doctrine. And that's probably what I'd say is the overall narrative to this, is that Blitzkrieg was, or lightning war as we now know it, or mobile warfare, was such a shock to the system. This was sort of Britain's response. We can't fight these guys on a level playing field. What can we do? And that sort of in our DNA, we have things like Lawrence of Arabia. We fought a lot of guerrillas. And that is a sort of wide understanding throughout the British Army that will lead eventually in 44 to us having an entire brigade of Special Air Service operatives.
And also, Tom, I mean, in going back to the Boer commandos in the Anglo-Boer War at the turn of the 20th century, that also had a massive impact on British Army thinking. That actually there is a different way of doing things, and the old school kind of thin red line approach. I mean, I know they're in khaki by 1899, but that old school approach of that, there are traditional ways in which you fight wars, and what the Boers showed them was that actually there is a different way. This sort of slightly more guerrilla type, this kind of sort of hit and run and dashing about, and really, really highly manoeuvrable and in comparatively small numbers.
And not to put too fine a point on it, the British Army is always up against it. It's always been the junior partner to the Royal Navy traditionally. And so if they can get more bang for their buck, which is a big part of the thinking, they'll do it, won't they? That's what's also motivating this.
Yeah, if we take it through its sort of very early history, I think the place to start this really is 5th Battalion Scots Guards, which goes a long way to explaining why everybody in the Special Forces is posh or most of them are, because this was a ski unit formed ostensibly to operate in Scandinavia. They weren't quite sure where it was going to go, but it could have been, it ends up nearly being deployed to Norway, but not. And of course, the only place you can find anyone who can ski in 1939-40 is amongst the aristocracy. So, they recruit the Sterlings, George Jellicoe, Jim Gavin, Freddie Spencer Chapman, Brian Mayfield.
And my old friend Stephen Hastings as well was involved in that. I remember him telling me that you could literally spot their progress by the number of champagne bottles that have been flung outside of the train on their way to Switzerland for training.
They go down to where is it, Chamonix, famous place to train for Arctic warfare is downhill skiing. And the first thing they do is they change all their bindings and lock them into their skis so they can do downhill rather than cross country. So that unit, when it dissipates, spreads a lot of people quite a long way around the military who all want to form guerrilla warfare. And then the other thing to mention, maybe another initiative early on, is the independent companies, who are territorial army. They do go to Norway, but they're terrible. I mean, they are not prepared for the German onslaught. One of the TA guys goes, imagine me, a South London boy who's never seen a mountain before. I mean, he's eating snow and being chased by Stukas and ski troops. They're interestingly commanded by Gubbins, though. And so Gubbins comes back with some thoughts about how guerrilla warfare might progress. And straight after that, Cloud Alconek, who's the commander up in Narvik, goes, look, we've got to sort this out. There's a lack of manliness, he says, amongst the British forces. He says something, he's sick with shame because he says it's lamentable in this wild and undeveloped country with all our wealth of experience. We should be at our best, but we're being outmaneuvered. And he goes, we've got to do something. And that goes up to the War Office.
Amazing.
Fascinating. I mean, there is a lot of worry about manliness and sons of the 1930s being soft-handed and all that. But I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? And then you get the shock of Dunkirk, where it's kind of proved true, isn't it? In a way, on a grander scale, that the army can't fight, that it doesn't have its answers to what the Germans are going to do. And Churchill's reaction to this is to famous memo in June, isn't there, where he says, we're going to need a raiding force. We're going to need 5,000 parachute soldiers, which sort of sets that whole ball rolling. And I mean, I think what's really interesting about this is all the different manifestations, because there are many, and it's sort of like it's a kaleidoscope of different groups. And as you say, lots of different people doing their own thing, and and in different theatres. But it's that memo that basically grants people permission to do this, isn't it? They go, right, okay, we'll be the commandos then, or whatever.
But there's also two things at play here with Churchill. One is that Churchill just he loves stuff which is kind of a bit out there and non-conventional. He loves all that stuff. But also it is the fact that the vast majority of the British Army's, even when it started, meagre kit has been left on Dunkirk. If you want to strike back and strike back quickly, it's going to be kind of Boer commando style kind of hit and run attacks. That's the only thing they're going to be able to do until such time that the factories have got really into gear and you've got enough artillery pieces and tanks and all the rest of it. And that's not going to happen anytime soon. And I think what Churchill recognises is that you can't just sort of sit back and take it. We can't, we sat back and took it from September until April and did absolutely bugger all. And what we need to do now is be proactive. We can't let the Germans settle. We can't let them just sort of, we can't just roll over. We've got to take the fight back to them immediately. And the only way you can do that is by doing these kind of hit and run strikes and little mini operations, because there isn't the army or the kit to do anything larger.
And then we've got to mention, Al, your friend of mine, Dudley Clark, at this moment, and Rob Hutton's excellent book on the subject, that's exactly what happens. I mean, Dudley Clark, which we won't talk a lot about Dudley Clark, he's going to come up a couple of times, I think, in this discussion, is that he's this extraordinary staff officer. He's basically sort of in intelligence, but he's actually at that moment of Dunkirk working for Jack Dill, who's chief in charge of the general staff, who he knows from Palestine from before the war. So the thing about Clark, he gets called in as a sort of crisis manager by several generals. One's Jack Dill, another's Wavell. But at this moment, Jack Dill's made him his sort of glorified PA. And Dill's looking out over Whitehall. This is the night after the Dunkirk evacuation, going, what the bloody hell are we going to do? Churchill's down the road making a speech, out of the jaws of death and shame, basically wars are not won by evacuations. We've got to do something. Jack Dill goes, what the hell are we going to do? And Clark goes, well, I've got this idea, because his family come from South Africa, and they were at the siege of Ladysmith, which was the siege basically that created the Boer commando. So the siege of Ladysmith was broken by the British, bit of a history, at which point the Boers go into the veldt. And that obviously is the name he chooses for his little outfit. He goes to Dill, he goes, look, I've got this idea. We need a guerrilla force like the Boers had. Someone we can get back across the channel, probably in boats, and start hitting the Germans, dissipate their strength. And he pitches the name and says, look, we should call them the commandos so they've got a brand and everyone understands what they are. And Jack Gill goes, yeah, go home, draft that up. So he goes back to Stratton Street where he's got his flat, drafts it up, comes in the following morning, hands him the draft, and Jack Gill goes to the Chiefs of Staff's meeting, and by lunchtime that day it's commissioned. He goes, yep, you're on. Because Churchill gets it. He goes, that's what we need. That is exactly what we need.
God, the days before regulation, eh?
I think it's desperation, isn't it, James? I mean,
get things done.
Yes, I mean, like there's other things motivating people, aren't there? I mean,
well, I know. I'm just thinking about how long it takes to make any decision whatsoever. Battle of Britain Memorial flight still grounded because no one's prepared to make a decision to put them back in the air again.
Yeah, but that's the window in these opportunities that gives the Mavericks and the Iconoclasts the opportunity to throw something wild in there. Is they're desperate. I mean, we've got no weapons, no equipment. We've come back across the channel. And Churchill loves that because it feeds into his view of what we should be doing. He loves that idea.
Yeah.
He needs bright people with bright ideas. I mean, it's a two-way street, this, isn't it? There are these people and he's prepared to entertain them and they need each other as much as, it's mutual, isn't it?
Yeah.
These people who want to make their mark need someone who's prepared to entertain them.
Yeah.
The ideas then come very, very quickly and, the training is very sort of pretty much immediately set up and it's like a wellspring of people who are able to throw this together quite quickly, aren't they? Who've got some firm ideas.
Yeah, when the Prime Minister and the Chief of Staff said this is going to happen, it's going to happen, So the actual first raid, which is the L2K raid, happens in 3 weeks. Clark gets on a train to Glasgow, goes to see the independent companies that have come back, licking their wounds after Norway, bumps into a couple of mates who've been in the Trans-Jordan Frontier Force with him and says, look, guys, we need to get a guerrilla force together. They say they recruit their 100 best troops, put them in RAF crash boats, and they're back across the channel. And they're chucking grenades into a hotel 24th of June. I mean, that's pretty quick, by anyone's standards,
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But obviously, this needs developing, doesn't it?
It does. But I think this is the thing that always sort of happens. So obviously, we know Clark is the master of deception. So his ideas are around pinpricks and mosquito stings, whatever you're going to call them. But Churchill, as you've alluded to, he wants something much bigger. And there's this sort of tug of war between Clark's idea, which is small raiding groups behind the lines, and Churchill's thousands of paratroop troops and an armoured tank that can fly,
Yeah.
I mean, no, that's the thing. Have you read it? It's like, I want a tank that could fly. Okay, well.
Yeah, fine. Good luck with that.
But you can do something like the L2K raid of the 24th of June, 1940, on the fly. But if you're going to do anything more than that, there's got to be a structure to it. There's got to be training programs. They've got to actually think about, are these just ordinary soldiers or are they going to be specially trained for special things and hand-to-hand fighting and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. So how does it then develop? Because it develops pretty quickly again, doesn't it? But into different units and HQ in London, there's training camps up in Scotland and all sorts.
Yeah, I mean, that's where the posh boys get involved again. So the Aristros get involved because while this is going on, Brian Mayfield and Bill Sterling attempt to get to Norway to help them out over there. Again, this is supposed to be a guerrilla raid, but they run into a magnetic mine in their submarine just off Scapa Flow. And then they go back to Sterling's castle and they sit there drinking whiskey going, what are we going to do now? And they come up with the plan to create a guerrilla training unit in Scotland. This is the Lock Training Wing. Yeah. And of course, at that moment in Whitehall, this initiative's happening. And this sort of just amazingly gels together. Suddenly you're going, oh yeah, of course, training in Scotland like the Gillies, stalking, living off the land. That's brilliant. That's what this unit's supposed to be. And so straight away you have this training outfit set up, which then gets all sorts of people like Mad Mike Calvert, who's part of the SS story, who's demolitions. They've got Fairbairn and Sykes, so that's what the fighting knife gets named after. They're from Shanghai, and they've been doing things to the communists over there, and now they come back to teach people to do them in Britain.
This is the moment, isn't there, where there is an SAS that is not the SAS, of course. And that caused some confusion for some.
Caused some confusion, yeah. I mean, I think you have to credit the fact that the first the Paras are going to hate this. Sorry, Al. But the SAS predates the parachute regiment because of this. So, So in the midst of all this sort of, we're making the commandos. And the commandos basically quickly outgrow Clark and they become a combined arms unit, big battalions. They lack some important bits of kit like mortars. So they're always a bit stuffed because they're supposed to live off the land, but they actually get used like infantry units. Yeah. However, in Clark's initiative, one of the key things he thought would be really important, because he's seen paratroop operations in Norway where he was deployed. Yeah. So he knows that airborne troops are terrifying to the enemy. And he thinks we need an airborne unit, because what would be better than going by boat into France is if we can parachute the SS, well, it's not called the SAS then, parachute commandos, and then recover them by submarine. That would really go some to worry the Germans. And so one of the units, which is called 2 Commando, gets converted to a parachute unit and starts training RAF Ringway. And then there's this tussle between the RAF and Army. And basically the Army are fed up because all these soldiers aren't getting employed, And the RAF go, well, look, sod that. We'll take them back under command. We've got 500 trained paratroops. We'll take them under command. And one of the things that everyone hates is the name commandos, because it's the Boers. It's our enemy. The staff officer in November 1940 goes, oh, they're special service troops. They're special air service troops. Type something like special air service. And there you go, 11 SAS or 2 SAS, depending on...
depending on 2 or 11, depending on taste.
Depending on what you want to believe,
They then do Colossus, don't they? And that happens pretty quickly, is the thing. Again, one of the interesting things about all this is that it is all happening fast, isn't it? And you've got people inventing and trying to, well, they're not just inventing concepts, they're then trying to deliver proof of concept pretty much straight away. So there's not a lot of hanging around, is there?
No, but it's very ad hoc. I mean, they're cutting holes at the bottom of Whitley bombers. As you know, the early parachuting is just bloody dangerous, really, quite frankly. But they get that going. They do quite an important demonstration down on Salisbury Plain. Ex-troop SAS drop there to do a demonstration. They're posing as German parachutists. So this is at the end of 1940. There's a huge crowd of staff officers. So that's quite influential because you've got people like Auchinleck there. You've got people like, a lot of the generals who are going to be in North Africa see this drop. And the key thing about that drop is that they're so surrounded by staff officers, they can't see the target, which is the bridges over the River Till and Shrewton and places like that. So, one umpire comes up to a troop and goes, hey, you're all gunned down. He goes, where's the Bren carrier? He goes, over there. I can't see it. It's a load of staff officers. So one troop of the SS, in typical SAS fire, go, bugger this. We'll go to the staff officer's car park and nick a car. So they nick the Crown Prince's Norway's car and dispatch rider's bike, and they drive to the bridge over Till and capture it, completely derailing the defenders. And everyone goes, bloody hell, that's quite good initiative from that lot, whatever they're about. And everyone's quite impressed, backs up and leaves. If you like, there's a beginning of a feeling that could be something.
But is also, with Operation Colossus in southern Italy, is there a sense that that's a complete failure? Because from Dudley Clark's point of view, it actually does kind of what he wants, doesn't it? It's sort of seeding paranoia in Mussolini and the Axis.
Yes, destabilising the other side and all that,
And the other thing about Colossus is a proof of concept because they put long-range fuel tanks in their aircraft, which, let's face it, in beginning of 1941 is pretty ambitious. They fly through occupied France, stage out of Malta, and they actually hit the aqueduct. So they do their job. I suppose it's just not a very impressive raid because they blow up the aqueduct, but that doesn't really do much.
And they don't recover anyone.
No.
Well, no, they don't. They would never have recovered anyone, actually, because one of the aircraft went down.
But the commandos are still in existence at this point.
Basically, that job comes from an engineer called Mr. Yardley, and he's a civil engineer, and he knows about this aqueduct. So he just goes into the War Office and pitches it, say, hey, there's this aqueduct, can you knock it over? And there's a meeting in the War Office, and the RAF are going, we can't hit a barn door, and Secret Service going, well, we got no one in southern Italy that could get to that with explosives. At which point the RAF remember they've got something called the SAS. Go, hey, those guys, we could get some engineers and explosives. Could those guys do it? And that is then the plan. But you're right. What happens is by that time, Dudley Clark's gone to North Africa. He's working for Wavell. He's his head of deception, which is a role in the British Army that's never existed before. Wavell's created it. And Clark gets wind of it, goes, hang on.
That's quite inspired by Wavell, isn't it? I mean,
very inspired, yeah.
It's Wavell's thing, though, is to encourage different ways of looking at stuff. I mean, he's been running the counterinsurgency in Palestine before the war. Wingate is one of his people for doing things differently. He's tuned into this sort of alternative warfare stuff, Wavell. It's part of his signature, really.
Yeah, and he's really stretched. I mean, there's thousands of Italians down there. He's got a tiny force. He's got to make it look bigger. And then Clark gets to hear Colossus is going to go off. It's typical British. He's CC'd by mistake on the op order. So he finds out, he goes where he wasn't supposed to go to, but it does because he's still on the distribution. He goes, bloody hell, that's a very useful bit of information. At the same time, this is the start of O'Connor's advance, and they started capturing Italians. And also, don't forget, at this stage, the LRDG, so that's the Long Range Desert Group, are up and running. And the Italians are getting worried that the British really have a special force that can parachute. And they capture this diary. So this is the winter of 1940 / New Year's 1941. And in the diary, an Italian officer goes, last night, British paratroops landed near my position. Well, that's impossible. Could be the LIDG, could be a recce unit, could be something. But if the Italian officers are reporting that, Clark thinks, well, when this Colossus raid goes off, I can just pretend, which is what he does. I can pretend the SS are here in North Africa. Because logically, that's where you'd mount that raid for. You wouldn't do it from RF Mildenhall. I mean, that's where it comes from. You do it from you do it from somewhere in Africa. And
Yeah.
Huh.
Oh, sorry. It's fascinating, isn't it? Clark is tangled up in this. Is really very satisfying because he's such an interesting character.
Yeah, no, I'm big fans on We Have Ways, aren't we?
Yeah. We need to take a quick break. We'll be back in a second.
I'm Marina Hyde.
And I'm Richard Osman, and together we host The Rest is Entertainment.
It's your weekly fix of entertainment news, reviews, splash of showbiz gossip, and on our Q&A we pull back the curtain on entertainment and we tell you how it all works.
We have just launched our members club. If you want ad-free listening, bonus episodes, and early access to live tickets, head to therestisentertainment.com.
That's therestisentertainment.com.
Welcome back to We Have Ways. Jim and I are talking to Tom Petch, and the SAS are up to their necks in it in France in 1944. So then we do start to be talking about the SAS as in the SAS rather than the SAS.
Rather than the SS. So now we're in Rogue Heroes. Rogue Heroes, the factual account of the evolution of the SAS. So yes, Sterling pitches up basically an 8 Commando, and he's out of work because, as we know, the commandos aren't very useful in the Mediterranean. They get there to do things in roads and stuff like that. But actually, by the time they get there, the Luftwaffe are completely dominant. Yeah. The idea of sending a boat anywhere is a non-starter. And so you've just got, I always like mention this, but my great-great-great-grandfather's hotel, which is Shepherds of Cairo.
Oh, yeah, amazing.
Sterling and his mates are hanging out there, getting drunk, shooting pigeons out the window, leaving messages for each other at the reception so the German can read where 8 Commando are, all of which is going down very badly. And Sterling probably reads the writing on the wall, goes, I'm probably not that long for this job. I'm going to end up back in the Scots Guards, as they all are going to be returned to their units. And that didn't really suit them. As I said, these are guys who wanted to go skiing and the George Jellicos of this world. They didn't want to do regular soldiering. And Sterling gets introduced to Clark, and Clark thinks he's a useful chap. He doesn't open the books completely initially, but he just goes, this guy could be very helpful if he wants to parachute. And at the same time, Jock Lewis wants to parachute behind him lines. And all of those guys basically get sponsored to do a trial drop. And then that leads to the creation of the Real SAS.
Who have a much discussed history, and we could use the word mythology, I think. There's a fair bit swirls around them. Some of it not helped by Rogue Heroes, perhaps. Although, I don't know. I thought it captured the spirit of the thing, of them really basically doing their own thing.
Yes.
And sometimes as annoying to their own side as the enemy, perhaps.
I think, they need an alternative beginning. It says based on a true story, whereas you could just start with, this is complete fantasy, but quite entertaining. But anyway, you need another caveat. Yeah.
But the point is, they do have this sweet moment, don't they, which is in the summer and early autumn of 1942. It's really when they're absolutely at their kind of swashbuckling best and going around and shooting up airfields and disrupting lines of supply and so on. And then there's the big one where they go in 2 columns and shoot everything up. And, and
they represent good news at the time where there isn't much. Yeah. That's the other thing. And that's often the thing with Special Forces people is if something for them goes well, you can take comfort in that or get headlines out of it in a way that the summer of 1942, as you say, Jim, things are not brilliant in the desert. So this is all finally some good news, which is sort of what Wingate, for instance, goes on to manage to spin in Burma.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I agree with you there. I think that it's sort of the right moment, and they're very lucky. The Long Range Desert Group is sort of the joined up bit of the operation. They're up and running and they can do long range penetration behind the lines, because we all know the parachuting bit is a disaster. That doesn't work at all. And actually, as you know, the trouble with paras is once they're on the ground, they're not mobile at that stage. I mean, obviously with 44, we're going to be talking about jeeps, but right then they can't drop anything more than themselves and a bit of kit. So once you're in the desert, or you're just infantry in the middle of nowhere, which is going nowhere.
But also what they've all trained for, the Sterling's SAS has trained for, is operations in the desert. And that's obviously coming to an end with the Great Triumph for Valamain and the charging across the whole of North Africa. And in a way, it's almost appropriate, isn't it, that Sterling gets captured at the end of in February 1943, because
it fits the shape of things, certainly.
His role in this has sort of come to an end anyway, hasn't it? I mean, you kind of wonder what he would have, how it would have continued.
I think there's two big sort of points. The hubris, which is around the beheading of the great stag of Auchinleck, is one, because he was a great sponsor of the SAS along with Ritchie. Obviously, he's also sacked. You have the Cull in Cairo, and there's no way of saying anything that Monty was not a fan of the SAS. He's not. Monty, it doesn't fit Monty's sort of picture of his battle and El Alamein. The Auchinleck at that point was sponsoring a 4-squadron regiment, which never comes about because essentially Sean Hackett, Sean Hackett, who becomes a para, at that point he's put in charge. He becomes a sort of proto-DSF, Director Special Forces, because they need someone who can public face this organisation in headquarters, because Sterling's in the desert charging around. Maine doesn't want to do it. They send Bill Fraser in sometimes. Bill Fraser's the quietest man in the world, So it's like you need someone who can be in the staff, and that's Hackett. And him and David Sterling go to see Monty, because the thing about the SAS, the thing about Special Forces, is you need trained troops. You can't use recruits. You need someone who's done at least 2 years. And they need to learn to suffer as infantry or cavalry, wherever they are, before you can put them into the organisation. And of course, there's a famous bust-up where this is before the Second Battle of Alamein, where Monty goes, well, what makes you think they'll fight better under your command than mine? To which Sterling can't resist going, well, what about the next battle after this one? And Monty smashes the table and goes, there'll be no more battles in Africa, which of course is bollocks, because there are a lot more battles in Africa. Could have really done with a 4-squadron SAS. But that leaves Sterling high and dry with some raw recruits in the squadrons, which then causes the problems, which eventually lead to his capture. I think that's the story there.
So the SS is broken up, resurfaces as the SRS in Italy, but then...
And under a completely different head. He's got, he's not a tactical head. He's an operational head, isn't he?
I have to slightly big up, well, I'm not going to big up, I will big up the Special Boat Service. They really adopt the Special Forces role at this moment. They're running around the Peloponnese and doing stuff like that, whereas SRS are stuck in Italy grinding their way and in a commando unit, basically. They're part of a commando brigade. You've obviously got now 2 SAS, which is important because when we come to 44, that's a factor. But that's a bit of an anomaly. That's formed under David's brother. And they are being used more like special forces in Italy. So you've got Roy Ferran running around forming partisan groups and blowing up the headquarters after he's been told not to do it and stuff like that. So they are more special forces than SRS, I think.
But then once Italy's over, there's this Overlord's coming. So, I mean, Jim often talks about the tyranny of Overlord.
Yeah.
All attention is now being turned to the invasion of mainland Europe. And so therefore things start to be organised along those lines and people are drawn away from other campaigns and sort of fed into preparation for Overlord. And this is when we get the SAS Brigade in Britain formed for Overlord, where it's sort of formalised and...
Yeah, we do.
It's the army trying to get this thing under control a bit, right?
Brought in from the cold, They try to get them in the order of battle. I mean, the thing about the SAS, they're just not part of anything to that point. They're this outlier unit. But one of the problems with the SAS is because if you're in the cavalry or the artillery or the infantry, you'll have generals who understand what the units do. Whereas the SAS, no one's got a clue at the general level. No one's served in the SAS. So there's no wide understanding of what this outfit could do. But you're right, they pull them all back. So you've got 1 SAS, which is Maine's unit. Then you've got 2 SAS at that point under Bill Sterling. And then you've got the 2 French SSs, 3 and 4, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then you've got this Belgian company who kind of end up with the SS because they're not like the Poles, where the Poles have a battalion so they can be paras. You've only got 120 men and they're going, we can't make that part of another battalion. Let's give them to the SS. So that the Belgians end up as a company of special air service and become 5 SAS.
Extraordinary.
But Tom, who is it who's actually, I mean, if there's no generals or brigadiers or anything who understand this stuff, who is it who's formed the SAS Brigade?
So as I alluded to, special service means troops we don't really know what to do with. Special air service means troops we don't really know what to do with. They have an air in the middle. And they're all pulled under airborne forces. Right? I'm being a bit facetious.
They're under Browning.
They're under Browning, exactly, because they're airborne. And that is a little bit of a problem because 1 SS don't want to get rid of their berets. They get red berets and that makes them really unhappy. And then there's this business of like, we need a commander. Well, the French have sorted themselves out and they get a demi-brigade commander. But they get this guy, Roderick McLeod, Royal Artillery. And I love this quote. He says, I was shocked at the posting as I had no previous experience and not prepared me for the problems of command over such unorthodox units. So he gets put in there to manage this brigade. But actually he turns out pretty well because, as I said, he's a gunner, but he has been on the Northwest frontier, 30-32. Yeah. He was actually CO of 1st Air Landing Regiment Light Artillery, but didn't go to Sicily. Oh, right. And he was commander, Royal Artillery 1st Airborne Division as well. But he hasn't had much operation, but he has done that course and he understands the nature of airborne forces.
Well, but this is the irony with a lot of the airborne people is they really haven't got very much experience. They may be specialised and they may be trained for whatever it is they're going to do, but they haven't very much experience of it because the bigger it gets, the less likely you are to use it as airborne goes. Once they're not raiding anymore, once they're not doing Bruneval or Colossus, they get deployed less often. So you've that peculiar thing of they've got their own idea of expertise, but not so much experience. It's a weird mix. I think it's very interesting they're not liking the Red Berets. I think that's very funny, given how powerful the Red Berets are seen as a brand for the parachute and airborne end of things anyway, that you've got one lot of people who love the idea of the maroon beret and a lot of people who don't want it imposed on them because they've already got their own beret, is the point, isn't it?
Yeah, they got the wing dagger or flaming sword, whatever you want to call the cat badge on their head, and they got the sand colour beret, and that dates back to LDET and the start of it. So you've got a lot of guys in One SAS. They're all sweats. I mean, you've got Maine, Bill Fraser, Reg Seeker. I mean, you can list them. There's a lot of men in there who've been right from the get-go. They've been in the unit. And they sort themselves out really because I've talked about the recruitment problem, but basically Maine goes on a recruiting drive. And one of the places he hits pay dirt is the auxiliary units, who are stay-behind units formed in 1940, initially under military intelligence research, and then they sort of fall under the world of Gubbins and Coleshill and all of that. But these stay-behind units are being kept to fight the German invasion. So they're sort of small teams living underground lairs around the country. And now they're released. And of course, they've got special forces skills. You know, they're designed to stay behind covertly in Britain, admittedly, and fight the Germans. And this is a real great moment for Maine. He gets about 70 of them because they're all expanding. So SAS is going up to about 500 men. And that's great. And he also gets a load of paras. The One SAS really becomes a very good unit. You've got the old sweats, you've got the auxiliary unit, you've got paras. This is a good force. This is a very good special force.
Well, and Sterling has 140 raw recruits. Who are the French, though? I mean... Yeah,
so as I said, they've got a demi-brigade commander who's Norbert Duran, who is... he was Free French. He fought in Tunisia. But really the characters are... So I'm going to call them... I think I'll call them by their British designation, which is 3 SAS and 4 SAS, because otherwise we get into the French parachutist and it's all a different number. So anyway, it's 3 SAS. And their CO is Pierre Chateau-Joubert, who's Conan. And Conan in the Breton means the wolf. And a lot of these guys, I just imagine he's got pressed combats. Wow. He's incredibly short. He's basically Asterix. You know, he's got pressed combats and a big beret on his head. He's about 5 foot nothing. You can imagine him parachuting to Dien Bien Phu with a gitan between his lips, or in Algeria, busting stuff up, which is what he goes on to do, to be honest. And he's escaped France in 1940. He's Free French artillery, wounded in Syria, and then he comes up to command 3 SAS. But there's a bit of a problem because 3 SAS and 4 SAS hate each other because 3 SAS basically are formed in June 1943, and they contain some Vichy French. So they've been recruiting around Africa. So you can imagine how that's going to go down with someone who's been fighting since 1940 on the other side. And so there is some tension. Put it this way, McCarthy says they didn't kill each other, but they're in Ayrshire. They would have killed each other had they been left in a bar. There is regularly a massive disruption. And then we got 4 SAS, and this is Pierre-Louis Bougon, Le Macho, or the Penguin. If the Conan the Wolf is Asterix, this is Obelix. This man is huge. He eats girls for breakfast. He's going to go and smash up some Germans. And he's born in Algeria, teacher, wounded twice, joins the SAS as part of the independent French parachute company. So anyone who knows SAS history will have heard of Georges Berge, who's the guy who basically bails the SAS out. This, again, we can mention Clark, because Clark's friends with General Crottreux. And when Sterling's short of people, this is after the first Crusader raid, he goes to the Levant to recruit in Beirut the French parachutists, and they come over, 2 truckloads of them with Georges Berge, and they become very effective soldiers. And that's where this unit sort of heritage comes from. And then Bougon, he works with Jordan, who's one of them, and he gets, again, coming back from Tunisia, February 43, when he's attacked by German aircraft in Algeria, gunned down, loses his right arm. They pull 37 pieces of shrapnel out of him. And when he recovers, he goes back to command the unit. God. You know, he's going to eat girders for breakfast, this guy.
Yeah.
I mean, really. And if you see a picture of him, he's always got a gitan with no filter between his fingers.
Yeah.
And he's huddled with some, Mackie or some French paratroopers in some desperate situation. Yeah. So then we come to the Belgian company, and this is I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, Blondie probably. And he's a reserve officer. So he was actually in America studying as a dentist at Northwestern University, Chicago, when war breaks out. But he's a reservist. Apparently he was a member of the Belgian Scouts, like, the British Scouts, Inspector of Scouts. And he volunteers. So he goes up to Quebec. They're all called up, the Belgians. And he's called up, goes to Quebec, reports for duty. And when he comes to England, volunteers as a para. And there's a bit of a tussle within the Belgian military because they don't really like the idea of paras. In fact, he's told that his unit should be recce,
right,
and paratroopers are not really appropriate. And so they sort of float around really because there's not enough of them. There's 120 as I alluded to, and they can't form part of anything else. So they get given to the SAS, which I have to say is brilliant because they are very, very, very good soldiers, highly motivated. The only hiccup for them is because of the sort of politics that they're only really supposed to be used in Belgium, which is a bit of an issue given where D-Day is going to take place. And we'll feed into what happens to them in the end, because it's frustrating if you can only be dropped in Belgium and you're invading Normandy. That is a frustrating thing as a Special Forces soldier. It's like, what am I actually going to do here?
Well, and particularly if what you really want to do is to fight the Germans. I mean, it's, after all, the thing motivating all of these guys, right?
It's like the Polish battalion army. It's like you're sitting around going, what am I going to do now? I want to get on the front line and I can't.
But Tom, there's also the Phantom Squadron, isn't there?
Phantom Squadron are vitally important. So the Phantom Squadron are a real breakthrough. And this is an initiative to create strategic communications throughout the British Army. So what this will give the SAS is the ability to communicate back to Britain from France, from wherever they are.
Wow. Okay.
And this is going to be, and we'll come to this in the episode about France and what actually happens. This is an absolute game changer, being able to call in air.
Yes, and there's several examples where that really pays off, isn't it?
Yeah, because you can imagine that's a huge part of this story, really actually massive part of this story. But that's been invented to improve communications throughout the British Army so that the War Office can have some idea what's going on the ground. But of course, it rolls out here into Special Forces, and they have got long-range communications. And David Niven is part of that outfit, interestingly. David Niven,
that's right. He is, isn't he? Yeah.
Because he sadly once said he was part of the SS, and he really was, because he was originally a commando. He was part of Dudley Clark's Carnage, so he was Special Forces, really. I mean, he did the course.
Yeah, he did, didn't he? Yeah.
He did the course in Lockett, and then he famously sent a message to his then girlfriend, who called the Great Dane, saying, I'm coming to London with secret weapon, which got intercepted. So he got picked up at the station in London. The secret weapon was obviously not a secret weapon. No. But they said, what are you doing? He was picked up and interrogated. Anyway, there you go. David Niven, he's a legend.
He is.
But yeah, he was a Phantom Team guy. Yeah, had one of the squadrons.
So then they're brought under Airborne Command. And of course, the Airborne people are kind of in 21st. Well, they're not really in 21st Army Group. They're adjacent, which leads to all sorts of problems later on when no one really understands the other. But you touched on it earlier. You said Bill Sterling is around for a bit. What happens to Bill Sterling?
Well, the problems start because the SS are in the Airborne
Establishment,
firmament, and so when you're looking at, and Monty's got quite firm plans, and there's an, as you know, there's an airborne plan for Normandy, and to start with, the SS are sort of fitted into that plan. With 21st Army Group saying, look, we want the SS to parachute between Normandy and Brussels, as they said, scattered like confetti, to slow the Germans down, because it's all about stopping the Panzers reaching the beachheads. This would have been, as we all know, a bit of a disaster for the SS because, small numbers of troops scattered in the middle of nowhere are not going to be able to stop Panzers. In fact, they were going to be able to do very little. And that leads to Bill Sterling going to see Boy Browning basically to have a row, a massive row. They have a massive sort of row because Boy Browning's on board with this 21st Army Group plan. He thinks that that's what the SS should do. And Boy Browning probably doesn't really get what the SS can do, but Bill Sterling's very much a theorist. He's got good ideas about how Special Forces can be used. His weakness is he's never been in combat, and that is his problem. And he has a bit of a problem because 2 SS have mutinied against him just prior to this on the boat back from Italy, because unfortunately, he went home while they were in combat in Italy, and that didn't go down very well with some officers, particularly Milbank, who's got an MC from around the time of Dunkirk, and most of the officers, funnily enough, Roy Ferrand supports Bill Sterling, So Roy Fran, who is the Winged Dagger author and legendary, very kinetic officer of the SAS, supports Bill Sterling because he says Bill Sterling's right. But unfortunately, most of the mess are against him. So I think Bill Sterling falls between not having the support of his own unit and Boyd Browning going, get out of here, So whether he resigns or, is sat, he says he comes out of that meeting saying, I've got to find my bowler hat, I'm a civilian.
Wow.
But then there's a lucky moment where they get Brian Franks, who's outstanding. So they get lucky. He was the brigade major at Termoli and things like that. So they get him sort of shoehorned in at the last minute just before the drop.
And for those who don't know, Termoli is a seaborne operation, sort of outflanking German positions, coming into this little coastal port on the Adriatic coast in Italy. And I think if I remember rightly, it's beginning of October. And the SAS, they do fine, but they have this one disaster where 6 88mm shells rain in and hit a truck just as they're loading up, and loads of them get killed. It's a very sort of traumatic experience for the SRS. Termoli kind of sits badly amongst the kind of the diehards of the desert, the originals, just to give you a bit of context.
Yeah, it's a bit of a thing where I think probably you'd say that as Special Forces troops, they're being a bit misemployed. They could be behind the lines. Basically, that row then flags to Eisenhower there is a problem with the airborne plan, and he sends General Bull, who's his planning officer, down to 21st Army Group to have a meeting with Freddie de Guigan, who we know is Monty's right-hand man, and say, look, what's going on here? What are you talking about? You're going to parachute the SAS here. And at the end of that meeting, he then decides, Eisenhower, that 21st Army Group will only retain planning for the SAS in their operational area, which is a bit like that corner of Gaul in Asterix and Obelix. It's the top right-hand corner. You can have Brittany, you can have Normandy, but that's your lot. You're not planning beyond that. And we will decide what forces you have in that area. And just to explain, because the Americans have been developing an Office of Strategic Services, which is their equivalent of Special Operations Executive, so SOE. They want to drop these agents all around France with the SOE to work with the Maquis. So they've got a different concept of operations. Eisenhower's concept is get the Maquis fired up, drop them tons of weapons, and they can really mess up the Germans. Yeah. But the Americans don't have a special force. They need one, and that is the SAS. So they want to use the SAS squadrons to augment those Maquis deployments.
So, that's basically the Jedburgh concept emerges from that. But yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it is interesting the Americans are late to this, aren't they? That they haven't factored any of this in, really, have they? And given now the American kind of use of special forces 80 years later, that they're sort of central to the things they do. It's quite interesting that they're not really up to speed at all, isn't it?
It's interesting because actually they replicate the commandos. So Wild Bill Donovan, who's Roosevelt's sort of Republican fact-finding man, as part of his tour of Europe and the Middle East, ends up sitting down with Dudley Clark and Cairo.
But he's also the first head of the OSS as well.
Yeah, he is. He creates the OSS after he sees Clark. So he comes back with an envelope with the plans for the commandos, which the British don't forward to the Americans because there's a memo saying we don't want to teach the Americans to suck eggs, which makes me think, well, what were we not teaching them? Was that because of the American War of Independence? They already know how to do this. Do you know what I mean? Why not just give them the blueprint for the commandos, which is what Clark gives?
But they do that in 1942 because that becomes the Rangers. They're taught by commandos.
Yeah, they are commandos.
And they originally call themselves the commandos. And then Marshall says, well, we can't call them the commandos because that's what the British call them. It's got to be distinct. And he remembers the Rangers of pre-revolutionary war days. And
well, Clark claims that's his idea because he says he watched the Cagney film Northwest Front and he told, this is in his memoirs, Wild Bill Donovan, they should call them the US Rangers because they needed a brand name. But anyway, whatever. I think Clark might be claiming quite a lot there. But anyway, they create that. But when Donovan goes back, basically, Roosevelt, FDR, he wants to create a secret service like ours. And Donovan goes, no, you don't want that. What you want is something that can do black ops and, other things. And there are actually commandos within OSS. They have commandos, as part of their outfit that can do active stuff besides their agents. So, but that's all going on. You're right, that becomes Jedburgh. And then, May 44, Donovan checks into Claridge's. And by that time in Britain, there are 2,900 OSS men and women, which we're helping screen, actually. So we screen them out and put them through guerrilla warfare training. And we'll come to this in France. Is the standard of the Jedburgh teams ranges from absolutely fantastic to not very good at all. It just depends who you get. Yeah. And the SS, it really depends. Like sometimes they jump blind because they don't totally trust the Jedburgh setup. First teams in go, we don't really want to be hooked up with that outfit at the moment. We'll see what they're like on the ground, just for security reasons.
Yeah. And then what is the concept of operations? What's it going to be for the invasion?
The easiest part of this really is what happens. So 21st Army Group are given 4 SAS. So I'll call him the Penguin, then everyone remember. That's French commanding officer, one arm, lost his right arm, Obelix, basically. He's going to be tasked by 21st Army Group to cut off Brittany, right? There's a lot of Germans guarding that bit of coast. And what you don't want them to do, obviously, is move straight across to Normandy and mess everything up. So he's going to deploy and cut Brittany off at the neck with 2 operations. He's going to have another team that's going to parachute in there and destroy railway links. And that's going to take out the whole of Brittany and prevent the Germans reaching Normandy from Brittany.
Right.
Then you've got all the road rail links that come up from various places. So if you think Bordeaux, the lot that come up from Bordeaux go via Poitiers. So there's the roads and rail links go through. That becomes Operation Bullbasket, which is One SS's operation to sever that link.
And this is between Poitiers and Limoges, isn't it?
Yeah, Poitiers and Limoges, yeah. So, and then right down south in the Morvan Forest, that becomes Operation Houndsworth, which is A Squadron, One SAS and William Fraser's outfit. And that's to cut off all those road rail links that come up from the south of France. Because, of course, the moment they work out Rommel, Rudensteg, everyone works out this is the real deal, they're going to pull everything and try and get to Normandy. And it's going to be the SS job to stop them doing that.
So I think it's also worth saying that at the same time, what's happened is there's been this, based on the back of the work of Jean Moulin in uniting French resistance into a kind of amorphous whole. By the beginning of 1944, you've got the French Forces of the Interior, and that's run by Pierre Koenig, who is the kind of the hero of Free French operations in North Africa and also in Syria, and he's now back in London. He is the ostensible commander of the French Forces in the Interior, albeit from London, which is also working in cahoots with the BCRA, which is the French Secret Intelligence Service for the Free French, also operating in London, which in turn is also under the umbrella of SIS, the Secret Intelligence Service MI6. So it's all linked together. And Pierre Koenig is directly under the command of Schaeff, under Eisenhower as well. So all these special forces are now coming under Eisenhower. But the whole point about French resistance is, as you're saying, the Allies don't want is French resistance getting in the way. So it's really interesting that all the different, they know about all the different Maquis operations, and Jedburghs are sent in where they want the Maquis to be controlled and organised and not running amok. But there are also lots and lots of other French resistance and organisations, Maquis, which are promised arms and promised support, but the British never have, or the Allies rather, have no intention whatsoever of fulfilling those promises. Because what they want to do is they want to keep them keen. They want them to do limited amounts of sabotage. But the last thing they want is lots of potential French commies running around with Tommy guns and Sten guns and Brown guns and grenades getting in the way. So it's a completely ruthless and pragmatic approach to the French resistance. And the SAS have a role within all this, and that's I just think it's so interesting that this is all about, it's about sabotage, but it's about very controlled sabotage that's going on behind the lines run by London.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head, because, there's a memo, SOE memo, which goes, the OSS, their capacity for blundering into delicate European situations about which they know very little. That's a black and white memo in the SOE file. It's because there are communists there, and we are dropping 10,000 tons of, weapons and explosives to them before D-Day. And you're absolutely right. If, the next thing, cut to the end of the Germans in France, the last thing you want is a civil war. So you're right. And the SS are obviously completely under control. They're, our people. They can augment them. And I suppose there's that element of, and we'll come to that in the actual operations, they can massively improve the effectiveness of the Maquis.
Yes, but I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that it has been worked out very carefully which Maquis groups are going to be trained, organised, controlled, directed, given arms, and everyone else is just basically cast asunder to kind of
left out in the cold.
Just left out in the cold, exactly that. And obviously where they're controlling it is obviously in Brittany, where it's an incredibly controlled and organised operation, but also these other ones, Bullbasket and Houndsworth and all the rest of it. But it's, as you say, it's where you can actively make a difference to German lines of communication coming to reinforce the bridgehead in Normandy. That's where you're going to make your focus. And where you put the SAS is in your absolute top 3 locations that you want to really have under control. And that's where they go, as opposed to, 3-man Jebriteens going hugger-mugger all over the place.
Yeah, it would have been a waste to drop the SAS up by sort of Calais and
completely, exactly, total waste of time.
Yeah, total waste of time. Yeah.
The resistance, when they do take things into their own hands, the fruits of that kind of stuff are tend to be disastrous, don't they? The unfortunate truth, isn't it? When they do their own thing and poorly trained, they can't fight modern combined arms opponents and all that sort of stuff, can they? So, you know, you can see completely why the British and the Americans are doing this. It makes total sense, doesn't it? And you're using the resistance as a sort of, not really a force magnifier, are you? You're using them to sort of move things along a little, but you're not relying on them at all. I mean, it's very interesting because, you know, you come out the other end of it, the French resistance stories of the nation rising to overthrow the Germans. And it's much, 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 much more complicated than that. And in many ways, nothing like that at all. I'd like to thank our French listener for the last 4 years, and now they're saying goodbye. But
you have to say, I'm going to defend the French here, because you have to say that the French within the SS fight like absolute demons. I mean, they want to rescue the Vichy, they want to rescue a reputation. But you're absolutely right. And in a way, what's quite amazing about this story is here we are in 1944, and you've got a strategic special force being used by Strategic Command to carry out strategic action. I mean, imagine that in 1940. We were nowhere near thinking like this. And here we are. It's a big jump, is what I'm saying, in the evolution of warfare.
And theirs is the deepest penetration on D-Day, isn't it?
More than, yes. So we get a signal from Eisenhower to the air unit for the SAS going, can you get your troops to Morvan? And they go, yes, we can. And that will become the A Squadron SS drop. And that will be the deepest penetration into France on D-Day. Yeah.
Right, okay. So the scene is set for D-Day. Thanks for listening to this episode, everyone. As you can tell, we're talking to Tom Petch about, well, operations in the Second World War that haven't yet been on telly. Let's just put it that way. So
maybe on telly soon, just not like this.
Probably not like this much, but who knows? Anyway, so join us, we hope, for the next part of this. We were going to do 2 parts, but it's looking like 3, isn't that right, Jim?
Yeah, but I think that's very much in the tradition of We Have Ways, and also in the tradition of the SAS. What starts small goes a bit bigger.
If you want to listen to this all in one go, of course, you can subscribe to our officer class on Apple Podcasts, our channel, or you can join our Patreon. Become one of our patrons, even more benefits, including finding out when We Have Ways Fest will be before anyone else. Anyway, we will see you in our next episode. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Cheerio.
Cheerio.
Thanks very much, guys. That was great. I'll see you on the next one.